Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we are going to go on an adventure, a Nashville adventure with Mr. Paul Whitten. We are here to talk about military service and just enjoying the civilian life afterward and what we can do to help others enjoy life, especially go around a place they've never been to or just get to know better a place they thought they knew. So, Mr. Whitten, great to have you here. And could you give a little introduction, especially starting with when you joined and why you joined the military?
Yeah, man. Good to be here, brother. So I got in the Army about 6 years after 9/11. So as you know, and as I know, and as most people know, the Army and the military is based on 6-year contracts. So I got in after 2001, 6 years after that. So when I got in, the standards were pretty low. So when I could get in, if you could like count to 10, do this, and you could pass the MEPS booty hole check, you were getting in. So I got in when the standards were pretty low. And what that means is, unlike your world, the Nukie world, which, everyone there is get their lunch money taken most of the time. I was surrounded by people who could barely read sometimes. But I got in '07. The reason why I came in is, not gonna lie to you, I needed a job, needed to go anywhere. Like many vets, I did not become super patriotic until I was in the service. I was the guy who was like, free college, let's go. That was me. Eventually, I became a very patriotic person, but that only developed in that time. To be honest with you, I grew up broke, man. Army was a good way to get money real quick, and those sign-on bonuses, man, those were nice. They weren't as nice as your Nukie bonuses, but they were pretty nice in the Army.
For sure. And so, what were you doing in the Army during all that time?
I enlisted as a forward observer. Forward observer is a infantry asset that utilizes indirect fire assets, mortars, artillery, you name it, close air support in conjunction with the JTAC to kill the enemy efficiently and with maximum impact. So basically, in a combat situation, as if we were fighting the Russians, you would have back in like corps versus corps, brigade versus brigade level combat. I would be attached to an infantry company. And I would probably at Alpha Bravo Charlie headquarters and a headquarters company, but loaned out. And I'd be utilizing my vision at an observation point to call for fire on the enemy, utilizing indirect fire assets. And I haven't said that in a decade, but that's what I did. Yeah, I've
Right.
been out for a while, brother.
And that sounds like, if I'm tracking correctly, one of the jobs that doesn't transition quite well into the civilian world. I've had people on this show who their job was to shoot down planes with like a rocket launcher. He's like, I got out and there was no jobs, especially he was a veteran who got out in like 1980, right? Before all the
Mhm.
security beef ups and everything. So I mean, what kind of skill set comes with that is transferable, if at all?
Great question. Ooh, I'm going to be real honest with you. What I got out of that, especially when I spent some time in Charleston. I'm a Citadel graduate, so I spent some time in
Okay.
Charleston myself, just like you did. But that was after I got in the Army. I will tell you, the thing I got out of it is I can take criticism and feedback in any manner that anyone can deliver it. I've been yelled at. One of my favorite stories, I was not a bad soldier by any metric. I was a very good soldier, but I still had to carry a plant around me to replace the oxygen I was wasting when I first got in. I had to carry a big clock when I was late one time, like Flavor Flav. If anyone
Oh
asked what
yeah, I've
time it
seen
was, I
that.
had to say it. That was the life back in that time, especially as a Joe.
Yeah. Now
And
that's
the
hazy. You
gift
can't
of
do
that,
that.
yeah, and that's unfortunate. But what you get out of that
Right.
is you get an ability to thrive in challenging environments. And the reality of at least combat arms in the Army during those wars is theoretically you had to kill the enemy, dust yourself off, and continue the mission. And
Right.
so you had to have a certain level of thick skin. And that thick skin has helped me throughout my life. But in terms of skills, technical skills, I am great on the radio, but I have not been on a radio since I was in the Army.
Right.
There was no one is better on the radios than generally forward observers. But yeah, the only thing I got out of it was grit, to be honest with you, brother.
Mm. Take a hit and keep going. And I gotta say, so you talk about killing the enemy, something said very casually, but was there and you talk about the thick skin, was there any kind of guilt or conflict within about that, knowing that where you're calling in these strikes, that there are people, or you were like, hey, we have a mission, these people did XYZ, we're here
Mhm.
to do ABC.
Oh, that's what's unique about combat arms, at least in the Army. So in the Army, you choose your MOS before you go to MEPS generally. That is not necessarily true for many of the other branches. So anyone who signs up to be a forward observer wants to do forward observer stuff. And I'm older now, but when I was younger, I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that job. I remember when I was in the army, I dated this girl who was a kindergarten teacher, and I remember looking at her thinking, why the hell would you ever want to be a kindergarten teacher? And she would look at me like, why the hell would you ever want to do that job in the army?
Right,
When
right.
I was 18, that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be the guy that movies were made out of. I wanted to do the cool guy stuff. And when you're training as a forward observer, your job is to point somewhere and it explodes. It's a pretty cool job when you're 18. I did not have the emotional maturity to understand what death meant and what killing
Mm.
was. And that is the gift of being so young and dumb. You don't know that stuff. You think you do, but you don't. And I was so young and stupid, and I thank God that I was. I probably would have existential crisis if I had to do that now. But when you're young and dumb, you don't think about that stuff. It was another great adventure.
And to a degree, it's easier to be attached because you're not seeing the people being killed compared if you were out there right on the front lines. Not that you weren't in danger, obviously. You're the kind of people that they want to take down. The enemy wants to take down. I've had some artillery and mortar guys on the show who were like, "Hey, we were the first thing targeted because if they take us down, that saves them a lot of casualties." But to the degree, you're not seeing that, and there's
That
not a
was
lot of media
certainly
coverage
true
of
in
it
Vietnam.
either.
That was certainly true in Vietnam. You had those big cords sticking, big antennas for those radios. That is not necessarily, at least in my time, accurate nowadays. Radios are small. I grew up in the embedder army. For any army vets know what an embedder is. It's the main radio system that followed SINGARs. That thing was like this big, and we all had one. And it was connected on a mic that was on your. No one could really differentiate forward observers from anyone else in the infantry. But generally, in my time, forward observers didn't do forward observer stuff. It's really unfortunate. Outside your rangers and things like that, they did that kind of stuff. If you were combat arms in the army and you went to any of these wars that we all went to, you were basically grunt infantry. Nothing against the Taliban, but the Taliban didn't have a Russian style military that we were built to defeat for the last 40 years. This was a counterinsurgency operation. So when we were in Afghanistan, for example, when I was in Afghanistan, for example, I didn't call for fire at all. Didn't do it once. And I was wanting to. I was like, let's do this. I want to be able to say, I've done this. I've trained for
Right,
this. This is my
right.
whole, spent years of my life wanting to kill the enemy in this manner. But that never happened. Instead, I was the electronic warfare guy on a fob. And we did a lot of stuff. I did a lot of dismount patrols, which is basic 101 infantry stuff. A lot of stuff like that. A lot of going in the community, a lot of, crazy little, trips and Humvees and circles. But really, my time, forward observers, Cav scouts, tankers, cannon cockers, they were not doing their jobs overseas. And that's unfortunate, but that's just the reality of that enemy at that time.
I understand what you're saying, but as disappointing as it was for people who wanted to actually, go out there and see the
Mhm.
action, so much better for us that we were over prepared rather than under prepared. And I think that is one of the things. I've had a lot of people on my show in the same position as you where they joined to be a certain rate or MOS as they call it, other branches, and it got disbanded once they graduated. They said actually we changed weapon types and we no longer have those types of missiles, so now you're going to be this or that, or people join and never see action. And a lot of at least I'll speak for myself and other nuclear operators I know, we felt so purposeless and kind of bored and like seeking to be out there in the field because we were sitting here every day, and yes, we're critical and vital to national security and international security, but we just wanted to see action. And interestingly enough, all the guys from the field we would talk to would say we'd rather be nuclear operators chilling in the air conditioned room doing, and it's mostly not air conditioned, it's very hot down there, doing what you're doing. So it's always a grass is greener, right? I'm sure there's forward observers who did
Yeah.
their job who were like, hey, I wish I never had to, call in that hit. So it's one of those things, but I definitely felt like I should have joined the Army or Marines instead of the Navy because I don't know that feeling of like you said, like wanting to get out there. But there's also that. weighing morality on my conscience. That being said, I just want to know if it had gone that way for you, what was it looking like day to day, if you could share that with us? So were you, how far were you observing away from? So are you looking at a
Oh,
battle
and
site?
hmm?
I'm
Oh,
just
so as a
wondering,
forward observer, as a forward observer, there, I'll give you three different scenarios they're often used. And then I'd love to hear about the nuke stuff for a bit.
for sure,
But so let's go with the cliche. The Russians invaded the Fulda Gap over Germany. The 82nd Airborne's got to hold them 48 hours while the rest of NATO mobilizes. So a forward observer in that capacity would be at a set observation point as a role of basically intel observation, seeing what the enemy is doing, locking in coordinates, and firing artillery at those positions. The way artillery works is artillerymen are away from the things they blow up. And so you require someone on an observation point to observe that, send in either grid points, the Army uses grids, Navy uses coordinates, but send over grid points over as well as other variables in the equation. You take in the humidity of the air. I mean, that's how like crazy this gets. And you're basically snipers for artillery. Except for you don't have this big awesome rifle. You just have this radio and a map, so it's not as sexy. But then you fire that munition. As a forward observer, you can request the munition type. You can do all these different adjustments to that call for fire and destroy that enemy. If you work with a joint tactical air controller, you can do type 2 or type 3 CAS, which is a whole different thing. But generally, that's the way it looks like in that capacity. The other capacity is your quick response where you're like, oh shit, what's going on? We need to do stuff now. And that's when you do a hasty call for fire mission. And when you do that, the major consideration you have to account for is what's called danger close. That is the proximity of the munition and that explosion. And
right,
for example, for regular artillery, it's 600 meters. So anything within 600 meters is danger close. Other munitions have different danger close distances, whether that be 120 mortars, even down in the 70s when we had nuclear artillery, which did exist at one time. That had its own danger close methodology. And that is kind of impromptu and quick. That requires more work on what's called the FDC, the Fire and Direction Center, where you have the super artillery nerds look over things in real time and bless something before it shoots out of the cannon. Third thing is you're basically overglorified mortar boy, and you're with a mortar team and an infantry unit, and mortars are like right in between line of sight, which is what a rifle is, and artillery, which is, there's no observation there. So really, sometimes you'll be with the mortars as they fire, coordinating that fire, sometimes very, very close, especially with your smaller mortars.
right.
But
And
yeah, there
so,
you go.
did you ever have? Hopefully, this doesn't sound silly. Were you ever at some point like using a telescope to look at the area that you're calling in conjunction with the
Oh, of
map?
course.
Or
Of course.
okay,
Oh, yeah. You got some fancy tech. Yeah. You got things that, but originally what you're looking for is the tech we would use. And keep in mind, this is my time,
right. They
is you
probably
would
use
see the
drones
distance.
nowadays.
I imagine so. But yeah, so you would basically be able to tell the difference. And this technology was so advanced that you can buy it whenever you go to the golf course. Because whenever you need to know the different distance that you need to shoot your golf ball at, you can kind of do that in real time with that
That sounds
distanceometer.
about
And
right.
that's what the Army had. So what was your rate in the Navy, brother? And were you nuke or were you a Navy ship or were you Navy submarine?
Electricians make nuclear operators, so you go through the schooling has three parts, the two regular style schooling buildings, and then you go on a submarine for training for 6 months, and then you go to wherever you're stationed. In my case, that was an aircraft carrier.
Yeah. So you spent some chunk of time in Charleston. You spent like a year and a half there or 2 years there?
Just
Y'all
about,
got a
and
long
actually,
training.
I was trying to, they had a program where you could go to college and become an officer, like State 21 and other stuff.
Oh
I
yeah, there
had
was a ton of them there. Yeah,
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 well, because
yeah.
I was gonna try to go to the Citadel, as you mentioned earlier, but I
Woo.
had gone on leave to surprise my youngest sister for her birthday and missed some of the paperwork deadlines because I didn't know about it until after I got back, and so that stunk. But I could have gotten one of those big Citadel rings that you could knock someone out with.
Oh
Have you
yeah, I
seen the
don't wear.
size of?
I'm
You
not
got
wearing
one?
mine
Oh,
right now.
okay.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
not
they're
wearing it right
huge.
now. Oh yeah, they're gaudy as hell. You got to compensate. That's kind of like the compensation ring. But yeah, the STA 21s don't get the cadet ring, but I will tell you, they lived a dream. But the problem is the STA 21 guys, if they go through the nuclear pathway, have to take the nerd majors. And that
Yes,
is no
you're
joke. That is,
specifically restricted to that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So
And that's a 5 year program that really they want you to do in three.
right,
And that is a pain in the ass, especially if you do the electrical engineering life and that CE life, because you got to do that, then the naval ROTC components. And as a generally like it, Navy's kind of weird with NCO ships and stuff like that, like rank and stuff, but you got to help the ROTC people teach these dumbass cadets. So it's that's another part-time job you got to do. It's a pain, but that O1 pay is pretty nice though, brother. Ain't gonna lie to you, it's kind of worth it.
right. I gotta circle back real quick. When you went to the Citadel, remind me, was that during the military or afterward?
That was technically during, my man.
Okay, so what did you go for in terms of major in education?
I was a history major because the Army don't care about what I had to major in. And so I did history and had a blast doing that. And after that, I got out of the Army. Every year I was in the Army was the year I was getting out. But the Army would dangle some cool shit in front of me that I just thought was, oh, I'll stay a little bit longer. I'll do this. I'll go to the
Mm,
Citadel. I'll do that.
right.
And after my time at the Citadel, I left out of the Army like pretty quickly after that. And when I got out of the Army, I went over and went to the UK for a year, had a great time in the United Kingdom, and did that. I was a parliamentary fellow over there. And after that, I went complete hippie because the Army got me all kind of crazy. And so I did 3 years in the Peace Corps. And I had the world's best time in the Republic of Armenia. As someone who's got all this like stuff, religious stuff on your background, I will tell you, that's the first Christian nation. And I got to go see some cool places over there, and I had a great time.
So go back. So how many years total did you end up serving?
7?
7. Okay. And so was there any, I know you talked about all the, the shiny object syndrome and all that, but you were
Hmm?
approaching the halfway point. Did that thought cross your mind at all? Like, hey, 7 years is just 3 years away from 10, and 10 years just 10 years away from 20, which saying it like that
Oh,
sounds like a
hell no.
lot,
Hell no. I was ready to go, buddy. You could see smoke coming out of my shoes. I'll tell you the moment I realized I was done. I'll tell you the exact moment. I stopped. I was always the funny guy. That's really what led to and I was blessed with being an NCO way too young. I was blessed with these opportunities just because I was always steadfast. I was funny. I could do my job. I could run like a fucking gazelle. So I was in this really kind of unique spot where everything the Army wanted, I was. Now in the Navy, that probably wouldn't have been appreciated, especially in the nuke world. But in combat arms in the Army, that was what they wanted.
right?
But I tell you, I got tired of it. I was a cadet at the Citadel. I was not an STA 21. I was a full cadet at the Citadel. So I was really done with the shenanigans. I had class and I was already went to a war. So I was like, why am I doing this? This is the one thing I wanted to do. I did it.
Mm,
I am now a combat veteran. Yeehaw. There's nothing left for me to prove. And I'm really tired of waking up at 5 in the morning. Like this just got to stop.
that's very fair.
So I was done, brother. I did my time, got my patch. I can say for the rest of my life, I'm a combat veteran. I don't think there's any difference if I could have said it. I was a 4-time combat veteran. I don't think that would have mattered to me at least. I did my time, did my service, got my high fives, bounced.
All right, and then as far as that history degree, was it like a specific kind? Like, was it in like a specific time period of history or specific culture of history?
Yeah, yeah, man. So on American history, I focused on the 7 Year War, but and I was also a political science major as well, but major it was history. But I really fell in love with transitional studies. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. Now, you say that nowadays, and people think a different thing. When I
Right,
think transitional
I
studies,
paused.
I'm talking about the Soviet Union to the Russian Federation and
Mm,
this transition of governance that was just fascinating. And that part of the reason what brought me to Armenia, because Armenia was a former Soviet republic, part of that USSR, part of that Soviet Union that turned into the Russian Federation. And all these satellite states became quasi-independent. And I just found that to be such a fascinating subject. And I had delusions of grandeur getting a PhD in this subject and making this my life's focus. And I did 3 years in the Republic of Armenia after playing the politic game as a UK parliamentary fellow and fell in love with that right at the Citadel. We had a professor who was a great guy who was an expert on that. And I just found that class and him to be a cool dude. Yeah.
You speak about the transition of governments and power in your studies of
Mhm.
history, and I think if more people were educated to that degree, we could understand the political climates of the modern society better because a lot of people don't see so many people as, and I'm no politician, right, so I don't think I'm a genius, but what I have seen and observed is so many people don't understand what the next steps are going to be. So many people are focused on what's happening right now, and they don't see why it's bad or good if government ABC does XYZ because they don't know the historical patterns or possibilities that we've seen when it comes to turns of power, coup d'etat, transitions of government, when a certain party, whether that's political, economic, or whatever it may be, takes over. Would you agree with, based on your study of transitional history, has that really informed your political knowledge?
Excuse me, the lights went out. Did the power go off in this building? There it goes. We're back. That was weird. So,
The
yeah, I'm in the
government
National
didn't like what we were
Entrepreneurship
saying.
Center. Yeah, no kidding. They dimmed the lights on that. I will tell you, easy answer to that is yes. The more complex answer I would say you is that even if you have this magic crystal ball, be able to foretell what's going to happen in future events, the likelihood of someone's ability to change that is quite limited.
I
Here's my
agree.
kind of hot take. The whole thing of, history does repeat itself, it rhymes, which is said 3,000 gazillion times, is a cop out to saying, like, I want to sound smart, but I don't actually know how this is going to work. The
Mm,
reality of history, at least in my understanding of it, as a historian who makes a living doing this, is that the being more worldly, and I mean that being worldly, going traveling, going to different places, getting out of your echo chamber, that is the cancer to our current society, as well as knowing a basic understanding of history. And then the most important variable is being able to say, what is likely to occur? What are different people going to think about this? And how do I control this narrative and or adjust things in a manner that's going to be advantageous to what I want to have occur? If to be honest with you, you got people who are giant history nerds who are not worldly. You got worldly people who aren't capable of having that
mm.
existential thought process.
About the
Having all
balance.
three is not something man is gifted universally with. And that's just my hot take. You got a lot of, and I'll give you an example of this, what I see in real time. I got a lot of history nerds, super professors who got PhDs and know what they're talking about. The ability to apply that history into something that is going to possibly happen in the future is a skill they're reluctant and or incapable of doing oftentimes.
Mm.
So if you ever, and I love doing, if you ever had a meeting or something with a PhD who is an expert on 1980s, 1970s, 1920s Ukraine, and say, what do you feel like is going to happen? You'll get a very elongated answer, but the reality is it's not going to have a lot of meat to it sometimes. And when you can recognize that, just know that maybe that person is gifted in this one subject, this one particular skill, but maybe not the others. So
I
there you go. That's my
agree.
hot take, brother.
No, 100%. Working in the faith world, right? I know people who have so much scriptural knowledge, but they don't implement it into their lives or live it out, or they could give you really good answers, but not be able to help you do it, right? So I think that goes for anything, right? And knowledge without wisdom, without the implementation is kind of useless to a degree. And then just it's a related topic that's on my mind because of where I live. I live in a state that has a lot of history pertaining to the Civil War. So I live in Georgia, so there's a lot of Civil War history, of
Georgia, there you
course.
go. Where are you
Yep.
at in Georgia, brother?
Savannah.
You in Hotlanta? You're in
No, 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 no,
Savannah.
no.
Diet Coke, Charleston.
Well, I think I had to say I
You tell
like
anyone from
Savannah
Savannah that,
better
they're gonna
than
be like, no, no,
Charleston,
no.
but
That's blasphemy.
I will caveat it with when I was
Yeah.
in Charleston, I was not of drinking age and I was not an underage drinker, right? So there wasn't as much to do. Not that I really go out to bars and stuff. I'll say they
Mhm.
both have different aspects to them and different setup to them. I like both. I personally think I like Savannah better, but it's been a long time since I went to
Mhm.
Charleston and actually explored.
Well, Savannah's
Either way,
great.
they're not my main, they're not what I would have picked to go to either way.
Yeah.
But all that to say, Savannah has been dealing with an issue. It seems to have died down now, but about two
Mm.
years ago, we had a lot of people trying to tear down all the statues, grave sites, all of that stuff. That was across the America, not just Savannah, but Savannah. I actually saw it in person, these protests and these things. What is your opinion on the destruction of history? As someone who is a historian and loves to
Ooh.
study this stuff, we've got people trying to erase history for the sake of people's emotions, and it's like, are people's emotions more valuable than historical evidence and knowledge? I know my
Ooh.
answer,
All
but
right.
I'm curious your take.
And judging by the manner in which you said it, I can guess your answer as well. I'll give you my hot take on this. I would not use the term destruction of history. History is always going to be there. People are always going to study it, especially Civil War shit. People love that stuff. In a perfect world, here's how I would do it. I would use those statues, especially glorifying Confederate leaders, as a way of kind of analysis of what 1920s Southern cause perception was. The reality is the majority of these statues were not implemented in 1866, 1867, 1868. They were brought in by the Daughters of the Confederacy in the early 20th century to enforce the Southern cause narrative. I have some serious beef with the Southern cause narrative, and as does almost everyone. That's, reality. This was not a war about states' rights, other than the fact that it was about states' rights to own slavery. That's what that was. The Southern cause narrative was less focused on the aspect of slavery, more on the aspect of states' rights. That's a fundamentally flawed argument. However, those statues themselves are indeed historical. They do tell us what the narrative of conversations were in the early 20th century. And I would argue that the Civil War is incredibly unique because everyone loves to say, and to the victor comes the spoils. The winner defines the narrative. Well, the Civil War, arguably, that's the one exception. The South defined the narrative after they lost. After Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, there was a whole false narrative over this. The glorification of Lee, the genius of Nathan Bedford Forrest. All these things, I will tell you, I will give a hot take. I will say that Grant arguably was a better commander than Lee. And I would say Thomas was even a better commander than Grant. That's, again, my historical hot take. But I do think these statues serve a purpose. And in a perfect world, you would keep those statues there, but ensure there is a narrative of what those statues represent. If you got Robert E. Lee looking all sexy on his horse, which I believe was called Whisperer, if I remember right, sexy on his horse, looking good in his gray uniform, and that was made in 1926 by the Daughters of the Confederacy to enforce that Southern cause narrative, there needs to be plaques going over that. The National Park Service needs to make that part of their curriculum to explain not just what happened in 1863, 1864, but also what happened in 1923, 1924, and how that narrative controlled politics all the way to the Dixiecrat movement led by Strom Thurmond and these other folks, all the way in the 50s and 60s, post Brown versus Board of Education. And I think that narrative is lost when you remove it. However, this is my last little caveat, because I imagine you're going to disagree with me on this, is at the same time, the South lost and they fought a war against the United States Army. I was in the United States Army. They fought a war against the military I was in. I do believe that there is a place for the broader explanation of the conflict of the Civil War and the place the Southern cause had in that. At the same time, it really pisses people off. National Park Service is a tax-funded organization. If half the people don't like it, and because of, I would argue, maybe a legitimate thing, in the perfect world, you would have those signs explaining its broader narrative and the importance of understanding the Southern cause narrative and its impact on 20th century politics. However, the reality is that's really hard to do well. So if I had to choose keeping it, enforcing the historical aspect of that with a narrative that explains the broader scope of this in a 1920s, 1930s perspective with the Southern cause movement, or getting rid of it, number two is what I want to be number one. The second one is remove it. The third one is keep it unmolested. So that's my hot take. And there you go. You're more than welcome to disagree with me on it. I'm right, though, but you're more than welcome to disagree with me on it.
My thing is a huge focal point behind why people want this stuff removed is because of, quote, the glamorization of it, or that people are going to idolize it and want to repeat it or be a part of that, right? So they say, hey, having Confederate history means people are going to want to be Confederates, for example. But you could say that about any leader, right? We talk about the Holocaust, right? And we don't glamorize Hitler. I mean, some people do, right? And I mean, that's just
A lot of
how it
people do.
is.
Yeah.
Because let me say this. People want to
Hmm?
argue that covering media coverage of school shootings encourages other school shooters. People are always going to have the idea, whether it's on the news or not, maybe it encourages it more. And by encourage, I mean it just inspires more. And not that's not why it exists. That's not its purpose, but that's just a result of it, right? But even if we erased Hitler from all media coverage and stuff, is someone gonna someday choose to hate Jewish people? I mean, that's just how it is. So I think it's like if we're trying to get rid of all this historical coverage and information in these statues to prevent the formation of someone idolizing their morals, I mean, that's just, you can't stop morality, whether it's inspired or further encouraged by glamorized history or just regular history. I think it's inevitable. So I think getting rid of other people's ability to study history to try and minimize this percentage of people who are going to then follow it in a negative manner, I think it's just not properly balanced in terms of what we're giving up and what we're actually preventing. Does that make sense?
The argument, yeah, what you're saying makes sense. I just disagree with it. And I'll tell you what, and this is my kind of hot takes on this. One, the eradication of statues does not mean the eradication of the story of the Confederacy not being told. First and foremost, you can absolutely destroy these over glorification statues that present a false narrative of the Southern reality of the American Civil War and still have discussions of Nathan Bedford Forrest at Bryce's Courtyard in Mississippi. You can still talk about Rosecrans versus Bragg. You can have those discussions, and they're happening all the time. That will never go away. At the same time, it's important to say that these statues tell a story not of the American Civil War, but of the early 20th century understanding of the Southern cause, a narrative that was created and amplified under false historical understanding. This is that's just reality, and that is, I would say, universally agreed on in academia.
Well, and I would say
However, the
most people
site,
don't buy into that narrative. And I can't speak for everyone, but I think most people who actually go look at these statues aren't saying, "Wow, this guy's a hero." At least that's what I feel because most of America agrees, or rather, I should say, disagrees with what the Confederacy did or what they stood for. So I feel like most Americans, if they go see these historical sites and these statues, they're not saying, "Wow, look at that guy, he's a hero." They're just reading the as the narrative as you describe it, and just disagreeing with it or just adding it to their reservoir of knowledge. And that's not to say that there aren't
mm,
people who go and are like, wow, look at that guy. Like, I want to be a Confederate. I mean, like I said, that's inevitable. People are going to always idolize someone in one way or another, regardless of their moral character, right? I mean, we have people all across the world following very evil political leaders, and we have people all across the world following good political leaders. I mean, this world is constantly in a war of good and evil.
I will tell you, statues are placed to send a message. When you keep those statues up, you are sending a message. When those statues are in National Park Service battle sites, that message is connected to the federal government and the National Park Service. Like I said, if you keep the statues, there need to be an explanation of its manner in which it was created and why it was created in the historical narrative that was falsely invented to portray and to ensure a false understanding of the Confederacy and the American Civil War.
And I agree with that.
With that, and that's my perfect dream scenario. You keep the statues, but explain its role in American history to explain the broader understanding of its place,
And
full
I agree with
spectrum
that.
understanding
Yeah.
at the same time. Just leaving them there without that, that is that is a cancer to historical understanding and thought. I don't think people are going to bow down to Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee. I don't think that is going to occur. But what I do think occurs is that when people see that are young and impressionable, because you're a little younger than me, but I remember strongly People saying a Yankee is a man that lives north of two rivers. I remember the Civil War ain't over. It's just halftime. Hank Williams Jr. sang a whole song about if the South would have won, we would have had it made. This was a huge narrative that existed for a long time. And it was a narrative built on the Southern cause narrative, which is factually incorrect. So the National Park Service has a duty to portray things correctly. I think this real-time history understanding the statues with a plethora of different other things around it, explaining its role is vitally important just for the telling of history well. I do
Right.
not think people are bowing down to Robert E. Lee. I mean, you got crazies. I mean, you got crazies, of course, but I don't think that's occurring. What I do think is occurring is we're amplifying false history if we keep them up in the current manner in which they were.
No, I agree with that. I think that if we could, like you said, the issue is no one's going to go to all these parks and statues and do that, unfortunately, even though we spend billions of dollars on other projects that don't benefit any of the American people. So, but
Okay, that's a
you
whole
know,
other conversation,
yeah,
though. That
yeah,
that's not about
yeah.
statues and removing statues I mean, that's not a giant, huge amount of money being spent on removing statues. And as the joke goes, taxpayer money, there's always more where that came from. But the reality is those statues don't really cost a lot of money in the long run compared to the total amount of money U.S. government has. If you think that's crazy, we were both in the military. The amount of dumb shit the United States Army and the United States Navy spent is
Hmm.
drastically more than removal of statues. I don't think finance or budget should be in that equation at all for discussing writing history in National Park Service areas. Again, my hot take.
Right, but the government focuses on finances and budget, and that will be a huge excuse they give. I'm not saying that
For
it's
the removal
true
of statues?
for adding more to it to give the full narrative, to give the full historical
Oh, I don't know.
background.
Let's see. Let's see. For example, you're in Georgia. So immediately, west of Georgia, you got the Battle of Chickamauga and Chattanooga. You got Lookout Mountain. You got all those places over there, not to mention all the things Sherman burnt. Chickamauga was the first National Park Service for the American Civil War. And that was literally, they made that like in 64, like when the Civil War was still going on. It's insane. With that, they decided to keep a lot of those monuments there because it wasn't made in the 1920s. It literally was made in the 1860s. So a lot of those monuments are still there. With that, they put a couple of living history little signage up there. Nothing crazy. And I think National Park Service's budget are so little that I don't think they got the money to do anything they want. And I tell you, you talk to these National Park Service people, I know the Stones River folks, their budgets get slashed every year. They got to rely
100%.
on volunteers. They can barely afford their staff. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I'm saying the government will use finance as an excuse not to do that, to add all of that stuff, or to not provide the funding for the National Park Service or whoever else is in charge of these areas to do so. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's kind of the reality of how the government operates sometimes, which is if finances can be used as an excuse not to take action, then that excuse will be used. Does that make sense?
Hmm. It does make sense. I disagree with it. I think this is the issue for the National Park Service. This is number one thing everyone's talking about is these Civil War statues. No one's really talking about, the boats at Niagara Falls. No one's talking about, the old house of Buchanan. No one's really caring about that too much. Everyone's talking about statues. So I think they're going to allocate funds. They've already allocated funds for the removal of things. Charleston removed things from Marion Square just recently. With that, I think they're going to allocate funds for that. And they're already in the process of doing it. I think they're about 90% done. Like I said, when it becomes the number one thing of conversation, National Park Service has to do something about it.
Right.
Just because people are yelling at politicians over this. So it's kind of, that
Yeah,
level of verbiage is pretty high up there.
for sure. And to me, there
Again,
are
my opinion.
no, I agree. And to me, with all due respect to the people who, have all these feelings about this, I feel like there are much more significant world issues to be focused on at the end of the day, to be honest. Like I said, this isn't
Maybe.
something that I talk about often, but I just brought it up because of your historical background and because I'm in the area. And for full context, I was born and raised in New Jersey. Everyone calls me a Yankee. I've been in the South for quite a while, but I don't want anyone to think that I'm defending the Confederacy or anything like that, right? It's
Yeah.
about just for me, it's more focused on the motivation and the process, not about, Confederates versus Yankees or anything like that. And I think the South-North divide, like you said, it's I don't know if it's always going to be there, but there is, and it has nothing to do with Confederacy or Yankees. It's just become like a North-South divide, like a pride thing at the end of the day, really. But you have the same thing with East Coast, West Coast. I mean, wherever it is, every city thinks they're better than the city next to them. It's just kind of human nature at that
Yeah.
point. But speaking
100%.
of, national parks, historical knowledge, and tours, I want to go back to in the very beginning. I mentioned Nashville Adventures and your involvement with that, and I'd love to focus on that for a
Mhm.
little bit as well to make sure that we cover
Rock
that.
and roll. Yeah,
So,
man. Ask away, brother.
yeah, well, I'd love for you to just kind of break down what it is and how you got involved with it and why you do it.
Yeah. So, Nashville Adventures, I started this bad boy as accumulation of everything I learned in every previous job I've had. Nashville Ventures is a tour operator, does everything from ghost tours, history tours, pub crawls, private events, corporate events, Civil War tours, everywhere in between. I have learned so many things in my life. Army taught me that I can handle anything thrown at me, and I've also been gifted with the worst days of my life already happening. Army gave me that. The UK taught me that I was in rooms with very important people and we're all equal idiots. Everyone is just different degrees of faking it till they make it. And that was a gift the United Kingdom Parliamentary Fellowship gave me. I was in rooms with people who make incredible decisions that impact the legislation and realities of huge, huge amount of people. I was there for the Brexit era, for example. A lot of those guys, there is no super special sauce that makes them special to anyone
Right.
else. We're all rocking the same IQ mostly. After that, Peace Corps taught me how to make a team, create a culture. In the military, you inherit a culture. You got to abide
Mm,
by the rules of the military. You can't
right.
invent a new culture. You got to dance to the tune of their music. And Peace Corps, people dance to the tune of mine. I went over there and I got to create my own teams, my own things, as I defined it as I wanted. The great thing about the Peace Corps, and people don't realize this, is they give you 3 months of training, then they just drop you somewhere. Say, good luck. See you in a round. And you just do it. I mean, this is the coolest program ever. It's got this negative assumption about it in the South, but reality is there's no organization that puts more trust in an individual to do great things with limited oversight like that organization. Amazon taught me how to play with big money. I was dealing with multi-million-dollar projects and I learned things. That was basically my MBA. So when I got to the point where I got wanted to do what I wanted to do, I created a company that was based on my values, on what I liked, what I felt others might enjoy, and it's blown up. I started this business with $3,600, and now we're on podcasts all the damn time. We're doing pretty good, and I think that's because we represent the best of Nashville. Thus, when people come here, we're a reflection of the city that they're going to enjoy very much when they stay here.
And I know a lot of people have heard about Nashville. How would you personally
Hmm?
describe it to people who haven't been?
Ooh, great question. Depends on the demographic. Most people understand as the bachelorette party headquarters of the world. If they're a lady under 30 years old, if you're over 35, it's generally like the honky tonk capital of the world. It's got a little bit of a resurgence in the early 20s, folks. To me, it is first and foremost Music City, the city that is the best of all the music cities. St. Louis, Memphis, New Orleans, it is pound for pound, I think, the most enjoyable. It's also the cleanest. At the same time, as well, this has a phenomenally historical background to it that enabled this country to be what it was. It's the anniversary of America this year, and everyone's going to love those 13 colonies. But because of Nashville, we have Texas, California, New Mexico, Utah, Oregon, all because of James K. Polk, who lived in Nashville, was a governor of here. You got Andrew Jackson, who got us the state of Florida as the first Seminole War as a general. So you have all these connections to this country that people don't even realize. The historical foundations of Nashville is the historical foundations of this country. And so wherever you come from, if you want to have a good time, there's something here for you. and it's delivered in Southern charm, and it ain't going to be bankrupting you like if you go to New York City.
So how does Nashville Adventures work? Let's say I'm someone
Mhm.
visiting Nashville for the first time and I want to, connect with you in Nashville Adventures to have a great time. What would the process of that kind of look like?
Well, they go to we're selling on Get Your Guide, tours by foot, tours by locals, Viator, TripAdvisor, Expedia, but really NashvilleAdventures.com is what you want to do. I always tell people we have the best history tour in Nashville. That's our 10 a.m. tour. But that whole thing is the history highlights and hacks. When you first get here and you know only a Wikipedia or one or two website understanding of Nashville, this will get you oriented to where you can have the most fun in the most efficient manner on whatever budget you have. And that's really what made this company what it is. I started it with just that tour and it got resonance, started blowing up. But yeah, that's what I tell people. NashvilleAdventures.com. We are expanding into XR tours. You're the first to hear of this. So we're going to be the first walking tour XR experience, I think, in the South, which is going to be really cool. That's going to be fancy. People are going to see the Civil War cannons in real time erupt at the state capitol. They're going to see John
Nice.
Donaldson going over the Cumberland River. That really kind of unique public history telling I'm very passionate about. We're also got the best pub crawl in Nashville. Historically Tipsy is the name of that, which is fitting. But what I love about this company and what I love about this city is that this city grows with you. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you're 90 years old, you'll love Nashville. If you're 20 years old, you'll love Nashville. There is not many cities that can appeal to every age demographic and gender like this city can.
And so what is your role now? Do you yourself personally lead any of the tours or you're kind of just in charge of
Man, I
managing all of
wish
them?
I do one or two. So it turns out this is motion censored, none too still. That's the problem. That's why it's doing that.
Oh, okay, yeah. For
Oh
those
yeah, I
just
need a putt.
listening, the lights have gone off on Mr. Witten's screen like
Yeah,
three
I'm in
times
this
now.
fancy podcast room and it's motion sensor lights. Whoever came up with this idea ain't splitting the atom to put it nicely.
Right,
But
right.
a good nuke joke there.
Yeah, yeah. No,
But
I appreciate
there you
it.
go. Yeah, there you go. But what I kind of really enjoy, what was your question? Oh, I do one or two tours a week, to be honest with you. And me and our operations director, we made that commitment. We will do one or two tours a week always, just to keep fresh. In the Army, we had this big thing called Be No Do. You had to live it, be it, do it, embody it in order for other people to really respect it and follow you. That's how we built this business. So I do one or two a week. Wish I could do some more.
Oh yeah, I remember in the Navy you gotta requalify. You gotta go back through or take the test and make sure you know all your
That's
stuff.
what's
So
crazy about the Navy. And the Army, there was no real tests to get promoted. You just do your job halfway decent. You go to the school and don't fuck up the school, make that 70 or above and you'll pass. Navy has some real damn studying and shit you got to do. I mean, y'all got real stuff.
some of the exams I took were 6 to 8 hours long, up to.
That's
You don't have to
nuts.
take that whole time, but at minimum 4 to 6 hours was pretty common.
Whew,
And
it's crazy.
and there was always someone who, until the instructor was saying pencils down, so to speak, that was using that whole time. And I mean, sometimes I was done and I'm sitting there like, man, and you got no phone, you can't go anywhere, you're just sitting there. Sometimes
Hmm.
if you had a bad classroom and they didn't like you, palms down, hands on the table, like sitting at attention,
Oh,
waiting
really?
for
Wow.
stuff to be done. But for the most part, you're just sitting there. You can't sleep. You get yelled at and told to stand up in the back if you even look sleepy, which in
Yeah.
the Navy we had a
Yeah.
saying, perception is everything. So if you look
Yeah.
sleepy, you're standing up and it's like, no, I'm
Yeah.
just sitting here waiting for the next 3 hours of this exam to pass by. You go into the bathroom, you try to see how often you can go to the bathroom before the instructor, stops you because you just want to get out and stretch your legs. But other times I was grateful for it. Sometimes some of the stuff you're doing in nuke school, you need quite the amount of time to do these problems. So, but yeah, it was so interesting. I remember talking to the barber about their exam, and I won't discuss, what was on the exam, of course, but hearing the questions they get asked as a barber in the Navy compared to us as a nuclear operator, I'm like, man, I could have ranked up like 10 times if I was a barber.
Yeah.
Like that exam
Yeah.
is easy money, so that is
That's funny. The
interesting.
barbers have exam. That's funny. I didn't even think
Right.
about
I,
that.
I wish I could tell you the questions they had, but I can't discuss that. But I'll tell you, Just try to imagine what would you
So
quiz a
nukes
barber
get a
on?
TS with pop. Nukes get a TS, right? I mean, I know we did. Like,
Yes.
well, we got a secret, then an interim TS if you did a
Oh yes,
certain
we have
job. But
we
yeah,
had
yeah,
there's different clearance levels. Yeah, sorry.
yeah. Of course, yeah. The TS with poly and all that stuff. Yeah, yeah. Single scope, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I got to tell you my one quick Navy story, and I think you'll appreciate it. When I was in Afghanistan, they sent Navy people to Afghanistan. They didn't tell the Navy it was landlocked. And so I got all these EOD people over there. And one of the jobs I had that week was to give the in theater brief to a bunch of sailors. So they showed up in our sector. We go over the common, IED rates, things are going on, everything they would need to know to kind of
Right.
function in our area of operations for however long they were there. And it was a no salute fob, because there's people doing stuff all around us trying to kill us all. If you salute, they're going to shoot the guy they're saluting at, so this is a no salute place. And the Navy '03, which is not called a captain, he's still a lieutenant, I think. So he goes by and, you know, what you need, sir? Cool. Rock and roll. And this Navy E7 dude comes over. Now, in the Army, E7s are a big deal. Like, hey, Sergeant First Class, what can I do for you? That kind of shit. And he goes like, why didn't you salute him? And I went, well, it's because and literally the science behind me. It's because it's a no fucking salute zone, dude. What do I call you? And he just looked up, nodded at me, and I did not realize is that E7s are a fucking cult in the Navy. Like I had no idea. Like there's a cult around the E7. And there's me, and I'm still I got a ring on, man. I got pretty rank on my chest. Like so I was getting fucking slaughtered by these E7s.
Yeah, that
And they
sounds
actually
about
went to
right.
like my chain of command and they were like, well, he's like, yeah, it's a no fucking salute zone. And you know what? You're still enlisted. Don't get mad at him for telling you to shut the fuck up. Like, what are you doing? But I had no idea the E7 cult that exists in the Navy. Like that is a different level.
Oh yeah, there's a couple of different things. Like funny enough, I don't know if you had this in the army, but we would have like there quote Filipino mafia on the ship. Like all the Filipino people had their own little group, and then you had like
Mhm.
I think what do they call us? So there's a term I think in the army for E4s. Do you have like a term for them?
Yeah, there's the specialists, there's corporals, there's the actual rank.
I mean like a
Oftentimes you'll have the ter
not an official military term, but like more of a, I don't want to say derogatory, but you know what I mean?
like a
Like,
group of them together with shenanigans, E4 Mafia.
okay, yeah, E4 Mafia, right? But because we were in it, so my roommate's dad was in the Middle East and he was a demolitions expert and he served a long time. He got us some paraphernalia. He got a sticker for the car. He said, "You're not E4 Mafia because you're not Army. You guys are Navy, so you're a bunch of E4 squids." So he would call us squids. So
Hmm.
that was just something different. But yeah, in the Navy, chief is, I think it's a pretty big deal. And because when they're selecting, and I can't remember what's in the briefcase, if anything, but all the people who are like chief petty officer select walk around with basically like a suitcase, a briefcase, and it's like you know who they are. And a lot of the chiefs would do all events together and stuff, and so like it was its whole own
Yeah.
thing.
Heard they
I
have their own mess, like all sorts of crazy stuff.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and I'll tell you something. If there's no dessert on the ship, the officer's ward has it. Trust me. I remember I was walking around the ship and like they were like, "Oh, we have no soft serve and no brownies and cookies. We're just so low on supplies." And I passed through the officer ward. First of all, they have these special round tables with a whole fancy tablecloth. They get like almost these nice much we're sitting on benches. They got nice chairs, and you see all these brownies on display, all these cookies on display. You're like, interesting, very interesting, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, okay, I see how it is. And yeah, the Chiefs had their own mess and everything. Interesting stuff, so
Different
little,
world.
it's little, yeah, yeah, you don't really have that in the civilian world, I suppose, it's everyone's everyone, and it's interesting, like as long as you're a veteran, it doesn't matter what rank you are. Like most civilians, just like all veterans are, equal. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and you could tell
Absolutely.
them any term. Like I could tell a civilian, like, "Hey, I was a petty officer." They'd be like, "Wow, wow, that's huge." It's like
Yeah.
no, they don't even know that's just a Navy term. So Yeah, but
One other thing I think is kind of unique about the Navy, especially, is the rank structure and the names. Like if you're a specialist in artillery or specialist in infantry, special forces, your pay grade is your rank. You're, sergeant, whatever. Navy, you'll have like E4 boatsman mate third class thing. And it's like all these different kind of rank names that are job specific. And so as like whenever I was in that, whenever Navy guys would come over, it would just always be like, what the fuck rank is that? Like, what is, it'd be very confusing. But on a ship, it makes sense. You know exactly what this guy does for a living, like that quick. But in the Army, you don't really function that way. Just kind of a little interesting difference.
yeah, well, and I like that like Army and stuff calls it MOS because like in the Navy it's called your rate,
Right.
RATE. But if you ask someone, anytime I've asked someone from the Army or Marine, like, what's your rate? They give me their rank. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's just a miss. So I'm like, I learned to say MOS, but then when people say their MOS, it'll be like, I don't know what the hell that means. It's like 32
Yeah.
Delta Bravo or something. I'm like, I don't know what that means. If someone says, what was my MOS for Navy? I say electricians main nuclear operator. Or I say
Yeah.
EMN, which, then I elaborate what it means. So it's
Yeah.
much easier for me. For y'all, you got to like learn and memorize all that stuff of what is what. People say I was infantry and then they'll give some kind of numbers and stuff. I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
just tell me
Yeah.
what
It's
you
kind of,
did.
and it's crazy because we're all the same country.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you would think there'd be some universal applicability, but the Navy is such a historically driven entity from the Royal Navy, and it's just kind of crazy. You're talking about the officer like mess and things like that. Very different from the Army. Like the Army's a little different. Yeah, but
Oh
we
yeah.
don't get those $100,000 bonuses like the Nukes get though, so kind of it balances out maybe.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting. So many people are against re-enlisting in the nuclear program. At least when I went in, that they actually started wearing a paper clip on their uniform that stood for "People against people ever re-enlisting. Civilian life is preferred." Paperclip. And they would
Oh,
wear
that's
this
awesome.
as a signature that they were not re-enlisting. And
Oh, that's funny.
yeah, I don't know who thought of that. I would have never thought of people. Yeah, that's a
Army
long
ain't that
acronym,
smart.
but the Navy
We
loves
would not have thought of.
acronyms. Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't. Army's not that smart. We'd never think of anything like that.
Yeah, I think the Army's version of paperclip for not re-enlisting is just giving the finger. I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
right about that,
maybe
but
it's kind of funny you say it because it was yeah, at least in my time, the wars were so heavy, deployments were so crazy. There was not really a super expectation to re-enlist. Like you kind of like people did their time and they got out. I mean, there was maybe 20-30% stayed in after that first contract, but that was really about it, at least
yeah.
in my time.
And real quick,
Maybe it's
just
different now.
last story I'll tell before we get off here, just about the finger is I heard a story when we were in boot camp. This young gentleman, probably, 17, 18 years old, made it through boot camp, which, can be very difficult for some people, can be just very boring and tedious for others. Everyone goes through a different, but gets through boot camp and you get onto a bus and either they take you to the airport or they just drive you sometimes across the street or down the road.
Hmm.
And as the bus is pulling away, he gives dual middle fingers to his instructors who were watching the bus leave, like, haha, and F you guys, I'm out of here. See you, suckers. Well, the instructors had the bus stopped and they pulled him off the bus and sent him through boot camp a second time. Said, obviously, you didn't learn anything. So, yeah, if you're going to give the finger, make sure you're further away
Do
or
it
just
tactical.
don't do it.
Do,
Do it in your
do it.
room by yourself in
Do
spirit.
it tactical.
Yeah, yeah, be
Amen.
tactical about it. So, just a lesson in case you were thinking of going through boot camp and giving someone the finger. Don't just have some common sense at that point. But yeah, Mr.
Amen.
Wynn, appreciate you coming on the show today. I think what you do
Appreciate
is
you.
really unique, and we're gonna have links in the description below for people to go check out what you do, look at
Love it.
different tours. Like you mentioned, there's so many different things to do in Nashville. So I think whether you're going for music, I didn't know it was a bachelorette scene. If you're going for a bachelorette scene, if you're
Oh
going for
yeah.
history,
Yeah.
whatever you're going for, check it out. And if you're gonna check it out, you might as well take a tall tour with Mr. Whitten. Ask specifically for him.
Amen.
Say, I'm not doing it.
There you go.
I'm not doing it unless he takes me. I saw him on a podcast. I want to talk to him. But yeah,
There you go. I love it.
thank you for your service and thank you for what you do now.
Thank you for yours. All right, my man. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.